I still remember this Halloween night like it was yesterday, even though it was the fall of 1998. I was 13, still young enough to trick or treat, but old enough to know it would probably be my last year. You know, that awkward age where you're not a kid anymore, but not quite ready to let go of the things you love. Yeah, I was right there. My best friends, Josh and Ethan, and I had made plans weeks in advance. It wasn't just about the candy. Halloween in our town was a huge deal. Streets would be packed with children, and parents partied while kids ruled the night, running through lawns with half-assed costumes causing mischief. The houses were decorated to the max, with fake spiderwebs stretching across porches, jack-o'-lanterns flickering orange on every step, and skeletons hanging from trees. And the air? It had that crisp bite, just cold enough to see your breath when you exhaled, but not so cold you needed more than a sweatshirt. You could smell the damp earth, fallen leaves, the chocolate, and a little something else. The scent of plastic from store-bought costumes. Man, it was perfect. The three of us had met up at Josh's house as soon as dusk started to creep in. His parents were hosting one of those Halloween parties for grown-ups. The kind where they hand out apple cider to the kids and spiked cider for themselves. We had on our last-minute costumes, nothing fancy. Ethan had thrown on a scream mask, Josh was a zombie, and I was wearing a cheap Batman cape with a black hoodie. We hit the houses on our street first, just to get things going. The wind rustled the orange and yellow leaves at our feet as we walked, and you could hear the tumble along the pavement. The sun had just about disappeared, leaving behind this deep purple hue in the sky, the last light of day slowly fading away. Porch lights flickered on, and soon we were moving through the first wave of trick-or-treaters, those little kids with their parents holding pillowcases already stuffed with candy. The sounds of giggling, the wind blowing through the trees, the occasional shriek from someone who got spooked by a fake ghoul on someone's lawn. It felt like Halloween in its purest form. After a few blocks, we made our way to Franklin Street. Now, Franklin wasn't like the other streets. It had the biggest houses, old Victorians that had been there for over a century. They always went all out for Halloween, each house trying to one-up the other with elaborate decorations and bowls filled with full-size candy bars. All of the houses on Franklin Street looked like they came straight out of a Halloween movie. All except one, the Malow house. Everyone in town knew about the Malow place. It was creepy all year round, not just Halloween. The house had been built sometime in the 1800s, 3 stories tall, with an overgrown yard that looked like it hadn't been mowed since before I was born. The owners, Mr. and Mrs. Malow, were an older couple who never came outside. I think I saw Mr. Malow once or twice picking up mail, but he was always gone before I could say hello. As we got closer to Franklin, Josh nudged me. "Give you a handful of candy if you knock on the door at the Malow place this year." I laughed it off. Psych! And then what, get murdered? But deep down, I was feeling that familiar pull. The dare, the challenge. It wasn't Halloween without doing something a little stupid, right? We made our way down Franklin Street, along with all the other trick-or-treaters. There was a constant buzz of chatter and laughter as we joined the crowd, moving slowly down the sidewalk. The Malow house loomed ahead of us as we made our way closer to it, sitting completely dark. The gate at the front of the yard was open, the path leading up to the front porch covered in a layer of wet leaves. As usual, there were no decorations. No fake cobwebs, no plastic tombstones, no pumpkins. But it didn't need scary decorations. The house was scary enough on its own. I didn't even have to say it aloud. We all knew it was next. Josh and Ethan started slowing down as we got closer, and I could feel the shift in the air. The excited banter between us had faded to an awkward silence. It was that kind of house that no one really talked about, but everyone knew just to stay away. You always passed by a little quicker, maybe glanced at it out of the corner of your eye, but you never lingered. It wasn't because it was haunted. There were no ghost stories. It was just creepy. People whispered about the Mallows, mostly rumors. Mr. Malow was some kind of veteran, though no one was sure, and Mrs. Malow was even more of a mystery. Some said she had dementia and was shut up in one of the upstairs rooms. Others swore she was dead. Either way, no one had seen her in years. "I'm not going up there. They're frickin' weirdos," Ethan said. He tried to sound casual, but I could hear the edge in his voice. Josh kicked at the sidewalk, trying to act like he wasn't bothered. I glanced up at the house. A hulking Victorian with peeling paint, sagging roof, and windows that seemed too narrow, like they were squinting down at you. Every year that house stood there, untouched by Halloween spirit. No pumpkins, no lights, nothing. Josh, of course, wasn't going to let it go. He had this thing about proving himself, especially if Ethan and I were around. That year, we'd spent most of our afternoons watching Faces of Death tapes in his basement, trying to outdo each other's tolerance for gore. He'd never admit it, but this wasn't about candy. It was about who would back down first. He nudged me, a grin plastered on his face. "I'll go if you go." My stomach nodded, but I wasn't about to back down. Not in front of them. "Fine," I muttered. "But we're in and out. We knock, get the candy, and leave." Ethan looked between us, clearly not thrilled, but he wasn't about to be the only one to chicken out. "Let's just make it quick," he said. "I don't want to hang around this place." We crossed the street and made our way toward the Malow house. The closer we got, the colder it seemed to get, as if the place had its own climate. I could feel the dampness in the air now, the earthy smell from the neglected garden mixed with the scent of old wood. Our footsteps crunched softly, and the sound seemed to disappear into the thick silence surrounding the house. When we reached the gate, we paused. The iron bars were rusty, and the gate itself hung crooked on its hinges, like it hadn't been opened in years. But tonight, it was ajar, just wide enough for us to slip through. Josh, ever the brave one, was the first to step inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air seemed to thicken. I followed, feeling the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on me. Ethan brought up the rear, looking back over his shoulder every few seconds, as if expecting something, or someone, to jump out from behind the bushes. The porch creaked under our weight as we climbed the steps. I could see the door, a massive oak thing with a brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. It looked ancient, the kind of thing that looked like it belonged in a museum. The windows were dark, covered with heavy curtains that looked like they hadn't been opened in decades. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched from behind. I reached out and grabbed the knocker. I hesitated for a second, my hand hovering over the cold brass, before bringing it down with a loud thunk. The sound echoed throughout the house, hollow and unsettling. We waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the yard, but inside the house, there was only silence. Josh shot us a look, trying to play it cool, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Well," he whispered, "I guess no one's home." Ethan turned to leave. "Sorry, guys. Nope. Peace out." But before we could leave, we heard it. The faint creak of floorboards, like someone shifting their weight inside. We froze. Another creak, closer this time. Then, the soft click of the lock being turned. The door opened slowly, inch by inch, until it revealed a narrow gap. No light came from inside, just darkness so thick it felt like it could swallow us whole. And then, a voice, low and raspy. "Come in." I looked at Josh, expecting him to make some stupid joke and bolt, but his face had gone pale. Ethan took a step back, muttering under his breath, "Hell no, man, no way." But before any of us could move, the door opened wider. Standing there in the doorway was Mr. Malow. He looked even older than I expected, more skeletal. His skin was waxy, stretched tight over his bones, and his eyes, well, you couldn't really see his eyes. They looked hollow, empty, shadows casted around them like two black holes. He didn't smile, didn't offer any kind of greeting, just stood there, staring at us. His clothes were dirty, stained in patches I couldn't identify, and his hands were covered in something dark, like oil. My stomach turned as I tried to make sense of it all. "Trick or treat?" Josh said weakly, his voice cracking. Mr. Mallow's gaze flicked down to Josh, then back to me, and finally to Ethan. His lips twitched, like he was trying to smile, but had forgotten how. Slowly, he raised one hand, motioning for us to come inside. "You boys are just in time," he rasped. "We've been waiting." I felt something cold run down my spine. "We?" Ethan stepped back again, his voice barely audible. "Let's go. Now." But before we could move, something shifted in the shadows behind Mr. Mallow. I couldn't see it at first, just a movement, something dark. Then, slowly, as my eyes adjusted, I began to make it out. It was Mrs. Malow, or what was left of her. We stood frozen at the door, eyes locked on the sight before us. Mrs. Mallow was hunched over at the kitchen table, barely illuminated by the dim light. At first glance, she almost looked normal, just an old woman sitting down for a quiet meal, her thin hands resting limply on the table, as though she'd been waiting for someone, waiting for us. But then I saw it, the way her body sagged, like something inside her was giving way, crumpling. Her head lolled to the side, neck bent at an impossible angle, and her body seemed to deflate, slumping lower as if gravity was pulling her apart piece by piece. Her skin, pale and waxy under the faint light, clung loosely to her bones, too loose, sagging in folds as though her flesh was simply draped over a frame that was barely holding together. She didn't move at first, just sat there, her empty eyes staring at us. But then, there was the sound. It was low at first, a faint crinkling noise. Mrs. Mallow began to shift, slowly, horribly. Her legs seemed to twitch, her knees jerking unnaturally beneath the table as her whole body started to fold in on itself, collapsing in slow motion. Her back arched, her spine pushing out against her thin skin, the bones grinding and popping as if they were breaking apart. rearranging themselves in ways they weren't supposed to. She was twisting, contorting, her limbs bending into unnatural angles as her body crumpled lower and lower until she finally poured out of the chair, hitting the floor with a dull thud. For a second, she didn't move. She just lay there in a heap, her limbs splayed out, her chest heaving in shallow, rasping breaths. Then, slowly and horrifyingly, she began to crawl. Her hands slapped against the floor, too fast, too eager, like some twisted animal skittering across the ground. Her skin, that loose, sagging skin, dragged behind her as she moved, sticking to the floor in patches like it was melting off her bones. She crawled on all fours, her body twitching with every movement, but her head stayed locked on us. Those empty, hollow eyes fixed on us, unwavering, like she could see us even though there was nothing there, nothing but blackness. Her mouth hung open, jaw unhinged, but instead of words, a wet, gurgling sound bubbled up from her throat, thick and choking, like she was trying to speak, but something inside her was broken. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My legs were locked in place, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body just wouldn't listen. She was getting closer, too fast, her hands slapping against the floor, her joints popping and grinding with every jerking movement, and her face, God, her face, if that's what you want to call it. It was rotting, decaying, skin peeling away from her cheeks in thick, wet strips, revealing the gray flesh beneath. The stench hit us then, thick and rancid, the unmistakable smell of something long dead, something that had been festering in the dark for far too long. Josh let out a strangled gasp, his voice barely a whisper, and he grabbed my sleeve. "Run," he said, his words trembling. "Now!" But I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. She was almost at the door now, her gnarled fingers reaching out towards us, clawing at the air, reaching out for us. Suddenly, her body convulsed, her back arching violently as her whole frame shuddered. Then she collapsed again, her head hitting the floor with a sickening crack. But she didn't stop. She kept coming, crawling, scraping, inching closer and closer. Josh was the first to break. He shoved past us, bolting down the steps and back toward the street. Ethan and I were right behind him, not looking back, just running as fast as we could. I could hear the door creak shut behind us, but no footsteps followed, just that horrible silence. We didn't stop until we were halfway down the block, gasping for breath, our hearts pounding in our chests. I glanced back at the Malow house, half expecting to see them standing there, watching us, or worse, chasing us. But the porch was empty, the door closed. We didn't say anything for a long time. We all just stood there, gulping down cold air, staring back at the Malow house, expecting something. But nothing happened. The place was dark and silent again, like it had always been. I could still see the faint glimmer of that dim porch light, but otherwise, it was just another shadow on the street. Ethan was the first to speak. His voice was hoarse, shaky. "What the hell was that? Did you see that? Was that what was that?" Josh didn't answer. He was bent over, hands on his knees, still catching his breath. But I could see it in his face. He saw it too. He was more freaked out than I'd ever seen him. That cocky grin he always had was gone, replaced by the look of a scared child. I gulped, my mouth dry. My brain was still trying to catch up with what I'd seen. That thing. That couldn't have been her. Not really. No one's body was supposed to look like that. The way she moved, the way she looked. The image was burned into my mind, and I felt like vomiting in my throat. Josh straightened up, finally breaking the silence. That wasn't normal, he said, his voice flat. There's no way that was normal. What do we do? Ethan asked, his eyes wide, darting between Josh and me. We can't just leave it like this. What if someone else goes there tonight? That wasn't just some crazy old couple. That was... Josh cut him off, his voice hard. We're not doing anything. We're going home and we're forgetting this ever happened. Are you serious? I blurted out. We can't just pretend we didn't see that. What if something's really wrong in there? What if they need help? Josh whipped around, glaring at me. Did they look like they wanted help to you? That was messed up, man. I'm not going back there, and you shouldn't either. It's not our problem. I opened my mouth to argue, but the look in Josh's eyes shut me up. He wasn't being a tough guy anymore. He was scared, really scared. And maybe he was right. What could we even do? Call the cops? Tell them what? Ethan was biting his lip, hands shaking. Man, I just want to go home. Let's go. We started walking, fast at first, like we could outrun the memory of that house, of Mrs. Mallow's twisted body. But it stuck with me, clinging to the back of my mind, like a nightmare I couldn't shake. By the time we reached Josh's place, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving us exhausted and rattled. We didn't even bother to check the rest of our candy haul. The excitement of the night had soared, curdled into something darker, something we didn't want to talk about. Josh's parents were still in the living room when we barged in, laughing with their friends, oblivious to what had just happened. For a second, the normalcy of it made me feel unhinged, like maybe we had just imagined the whole thing. But I knew we hadn't. I could still see the way Mrs. Mallow's body moved, like a puppet with tangled strings. I'm going to bed, Josh muttered, not even bothering to say goodnight. Ethan and I mumbled something in return, but no one was in the mood for conversation. We were all too busy replaying what had just happened, trying to make sense of it. Ethan and I headed upstairs to Josh's room, but neither of us bothered to change into pajamas or unpack our sleeping bags. We just laid there, staring at the ceiling. Every creak in the house, every groan of the floorboards made my heart jump. I kept picturing Mrs. Mallow's face. No, not her face. Her mask. That's what it looked like. A mask stretched too tight over something rotten underneath. I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been watching us. Not just looking at us, but really seeing us. Like she'd marked us somehow. It was a stupid thought, but it stuck with me all night. I was terrified I'd wake up and she'd be standing over me. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, but it wasn't restful. My dreams were a mess of dark hallways, twisted bodies, and eyes. Those hollow, empty eyes staring through me. When I woke up the next morning, my skin was slick with cold sweat, my heart still pounding. We didn't talk about the Malow house the next day. Not really. Josh was quiet, distant, which wasn't like him. He usually couldn't stop running his mouth, but now he just mumbled answers, kept his eyes down, and didn't crack a single joke. Ethan left early, muttering something about having to help his dad with some yard work, but I knew he just wanted to be out of there. I didn't blame him. The whole thing felt like we had stumbled into something humans weren't supposed to see. I left soon after, walking back to my house in the cold autumn sunlight, but the daylight didn't help. The world felt quieter, heavier. I couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling sitting in my chest, like something bad was coming for me. That night, I kept thinking about what Mr. Mallow had said. We've been waiting. Waiting for what? Why had they opened the door for us? I tried to push the thoughts away, but they wouldn't leave. Every shadow seemed a little too dark, every creak of the house a little too loud. I didn't sleep well for days. And then, about a week later, I heard the news. Mr. and Mrs. Mallow were dead. It wasn't until the smell started leaking out of the house that the neighbors called someone to check on them. They found Mr. Mallow, dead in his recliner. He had been dead for weeks. But Mrs. Mallow, well, they found her body upstairs, in a chair rotting. The coroner said she must have been dead for at least a year. Mr. Mallow had never told anyone. But I saw her. I saw both of them. We all did. That night. I swear, we saw her moving, walking, staring at us with those dead eyes. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I couldn't explain what the hell we saw. Josh wouldn't talk about it. Neither would Ethan. We all just went back to our lives, pretending like it hadn't happened. But it stayed with us, lingering in the back of our minds. A memory we didn't want, but couldn't shake. The town boarded up the house and left it to rot. No one wanted to buy it. No one even wanted to get close enough to tear it down. But every year, near Halloween, when the air turns cold and the leaves start to fall, I think about that night, about what we saw, about what really happened in that house. That sound, that wet crunch of her body as it hit the floor. It's burned into my memory. I swear I can still hear it sometimes, like an echo in the back of my mind. The scariest thing that ever happened to me on Halloween was back when I was living in Liverpool for university. Halloween is always a big night for students, as is any yearly event that involves dressing up and getting pissed. But since Halloween is a really good excuse to wear considerably less clothes than usual, party-oriented students tend to get particularly excited about it. I'm in my second year at this point, living with a bunch of my student mates just off Smithdown Road, which is where loads of students can get shared houses for really cheap rent. We heard that this big house party was happening just down the road from us, one of those that had its own little Facebook events page set up to keep track of invites and give people directions to the house. I remember my mates sitting around the kitchen table, all staring at the screen as they went through all the profiles of girls that said they were attending. I mean, some of them were absolutely gorgeous, so we were all definitely hyped about it. However, just a few days before Halloween, I started to feel really grim. I had the shakes. I was running to and from the toilet every half an hour to erupt from both ends, and I could barely keep any food down. This persisted for like 48 hours straight, and thankfully it had abided by Halloween itself, but I still felt too rough to do any serious partying. The last thing I wanted to do was to end up browning myself in front of like half the girls at our uni. I mean, every lad wants to be a legend, don't they? But for the right reasons. So anyway, on the day of the house party, despite my mates insisting I make an appearance and throw together a costume, I'd made the firm decision to stay at home and chill for the evening. As much as I felt like I was missing out, I just didn't feel up to it. So about 7-ish, my mates are pre-drinking in the kitchen, while I'm up in my room looking to order the spiciest curry I could get my hands on, in the hopes that I would purge the rest of the sickness out of me, so I could start the following week feeling fresh again. So about the time I'm burning my face off with the chicken vindula, My mates are just about to head off down to the house party for a night of debauchery. There are a few final pleas for me to join them, but these are violently rebuked. There might have been a chance of me joining them before the curry, but afterwards, no chance. I was in a full-on food coma. So a couple hours later, I'm just chilling on the couch and wondering why British Netflix had such a dire collection of horror films when there's a knock at our front door. My first thought is that there's been some kind of puke-related disaster, and one of the lads had come back to get a change of clothes before heading back to the house party. I mean, this wasn't entirely out of the question, since the house party was only around the corner, safe staggering distance for anyone that had drank too much too quickly. But it then occurred to me that there was a chance it could have been trick-or-treaters. Smithtown has a big mix of residential and student housing, so there was also a decent chance it could have been kids looking for sweets. So to save the house from getting egged, I leg it into the kitchen and grab a few bits from the cupboards to offer any potential trick-or-treaters. But when I answered the door, Mars bars in hand, there was no one there. Maybe I'd just taken too long grabbing the sweets, or maybe it was just some knock and run type deal. But either way, there was no one to be seen. So I just head back inside, plonk myself down on the couch, and get back to digesting the ton of curry I'd just eaten. A short while later, I'm still watching Netflix, about to doze off, when something in the corner of the living room catches my eye. You know when you're so used to looking at a certain something that just the oddest little difference catches your eye? Well, I happened to notice that there was a little less of the orange streetlights outside, coming through the little crack between the curtains and the window. Like this dark shape was outside, standing at the window. I sit up all nervous, and it disappears from view, allowing me to see the orange light illuminating the street outside again. Someone had been watching me. I got up, rushed to the cupboard under the stairs to grab my housemate's cricket bat, then snuck towards the front door. I threw it open, ready to swing at whatever was out there. But again, there was nothing. I started to feel like I was going mental at this point, that maybe I was just exhausted from being sick most of the week. I hadn't slept very well at all during the few days prior to Halloween, and I tried to reassure myself that maybe I was just a wee bit jumpy from being overtired. I decided it was best I'd just get an early night, telling myself I'd feel much better in the morning. I did a bit of washing up, took a shower, then put on some comfy clothes to get ready for bed. But just as I do, there's another knock on the door. Only this time, I can clearly hear some young-sounding voices go, "Trick or treat," from the other side of the door. I'd almost jumped out of my skin when I heard the door go, but the voice was weirdly reassuring. I mean, it was only trick-or-treaters, right? The worst that could happen was I got a few eggs thrown at me, or some toilet paper lashed over the house. I walked downstairs, grabbed the handful of Mars bars I'd fished out of the cupboard, then opened up the front door. I was expecting to see a gaggle of school-aged kids, maybe accompanied by an adult supervising them. But there was just one, smallish-looking figure that stood in the pathway of our shared house. They couldn't have been any older than a teenager, but they definitely looked a little bit too old to be trick-or-treating. I don't imagine they'd have been particularly intimidating otherwise, but the mask they were wearing seriously gave me the creeps. It looked old, like it smelled disgusting, unwashed latex on the inside. I'm not even sure it was meant to be a Halloween mask at all. It was like an old man's face with these tiny black eyes and a big white smile, stretching from ear to ear. I made some derisive comment to him like, "Aren't you a bit old to be trick-or-treating?" but held the handful of Mars bars out towards him anyway. I reckoned he'd just tell me to bugger off, snatch the sweets off me, and look it down the path. But he didn't. The lad just stood there, looking at me from behind the mask, not even moving to take the chocolate bars off me. I asked him if he was alright, starting to actually get creeped out by his behavior on top of the weird old mask he was wearing. But still he didn't say anything. There was something intensely creepy about not being able to see his actual eyes behind the mask, and the longer we stood there in silence, just staring at each other, the more I felt myself begin to tense up. Then, right as I was about to give him an awkward goodbye and shut the door, I hear a loud noise coming from behind me. I didn't really think the situation through. I just reacted, running into the kitchen at the back of the house where the noise was coming from, just in time to see someone smash the back door open. About 3 or 4 people then pour into the kitchen, all wearing masks, some armed with baseball bats, others with these big knives in their hands. I turn around and leg it back towards the front door, planning on running upstairs to my room where my phone was charging to ring the police. But to my absolute horror, blocking the way to the stairs was the little lad with the mask on, only this time, he had a knife in his hand too. He'd been in on the whole thing that whole time, and as he pointed the knife in my direction, all I could do was raise my hands in this please don't stab me type of way. "Get on the floor now," he said, in this voice that seriously sounded like he was no older than about 14. Like he legit sounded like a kid, and that scared me even more. A grown man might have the presence of mind not to hurt anyone and keep the severity of their crimes to a minimum, but a kid? Bloody hell, I thought he might just stab me up for fun of that. I'd heard stories about gangs all over the world making younger kids commit violence just to sort of prove themselves, and that's what had me shaking as I lay down on the carpeted floor in the hallway, face down with my hands on the back of my head. I listened as the gang just completely ransacked the house. I couldn't see exactly what they were taking, but I heard them mentioning laptops and phones a fair bit, laughing to themselves as they absolutely raided each and every room in the house. At some points, I heard smashing and crashing noises as they just took it upon themselves to commit as much wanton destruction as they liked, giggling maniacally to each other as they realized they had the time and freedom to do pretty much whatever they fancied. I thought if I just lay there, keeping still and quiet, that they'd leave me alone, but that was just wishful thinking on my part. Obviously, they had to make their way through the hallway a fair few times, and whenever they did, they'd either literally walk all over me, which was painful enough, or they get in a few kicks here and there just to hear me grimace. I think the worst part of the physical abuse was when I heard one of them say, like, "Kick him in the balls, lad," to one of their mates. I tried to shut my legs, but they still aimed a few kicks between my thighs. Luckily, I was kind of tucked up, if you know what I mean, and there wasn't anything too delicate exposed. But still, the idea of getting my bollocks crushed under the trainer of some disgusting little thug had my heart practically jumping out of my throat. It sort of reminded me of that scene from A Clockwork Orange. They were there to rob us, that was bloody obvious, but they clearly took a great deal of joy in just being able to terrorize someone for a bit, and they seemed to get a real kick out of realizing that I wasn't from Liverpool. At one point I said something like, "Just take what you want, but please don't hurt me." They just burst out laughing. I wouldn't say I'm posh by any stretch of the imagination, but I definitely say I'm well more spoken than your average scouser. They started mimicking me in these piss-take voices, stomping on my head and kicking me. I just lay there, wishing I never said anything. After what seemed like forever, listening to those kids ferrying out belongings into the alley behind the house, they finally left, but not before putting one of their knives to my throat and telling me they'd be back to cut my head off if they so much as even saw a police car in the area. Then, as quickly as they'd all appeared, they just ghosted. I waited for a long time before I found it in me to stand up, and as I tried, my knees were way shakier than I'd care to admit. I went from room to room surveying the destruction. The place was a mess, but the thing that amazed and gutted me more than anything was the sheer amount of stuff they'd taken. God knows how they'd all get it all away from the house, but they'd taken the TVs, our game consoles, audio equipment, pretty much anything electrical that wasn't nailed down. It also looked like they'd taken pretty much all of our trainers and had raided our closets for any clothes that they took to their liking. I wanted to call the police. I really did. But with what phone? I'm almost glad I got a few kicks to the head. Otherwise, the sense of shame and humiliation might have been too much to bear. I ended up knocking at my neighbors' houses, but unlike me, they were way too smart to answer their doors to strangers on Halloween. It was probably the single worst experience of my life up to that point. I had to just go back inside the house and sit there on the living room couch with my head in my hands, just trying not to hold back tears. It was hours before any of my drunken housemates arrived back. Before that, I think I just sort of sat there at the kitchen table in the one room that hadn't been completely ransacked, just drinking a few tins of lager, feeling absolutely shell-shocked, until finally two of them, who hadn't pulled, returned home. And that's about the end of it. There's no real resolution of this story. The police couldn't do anything other than take down a list of what had been stolen in the hopes that any of the laptops turned up in pawn shops, but we never heard of anything involving that. It was weird in that house for a long while after. I used to think the other lads blamed me for what happened, for not defending the house properly, but I realized that was just the trauma from that night making me doubt myself. I had nightmares for a while, a long while actually, and in the end my parents paid for a few counseling sessions to help me get through my skull that what happened that night wasn't really my fault, how it could have happened to anyone. I got past it in time, but to this day, it remains the single most terrifying event of my entire life. Let me first clarify by saying this happened during my college's Halloween celebration a few years ago, and it's the most terrifying experience of my life. One of my roommates, some friends, and myself left to go to a party around dusk, and we were being catcalled by a group of 3 drifters. We thought nothing of it and went on our merry way. About 4 hours later, we're going back to our apartment to change shoes. High heels and messed up streets are one hell of a thing when you've been drinking, when one of the drifters calls out to me, "Hey beautiful, how about a kiss?" Me being a little drunk and sassy, I reply, "No thanks, girls are more my type." To my shock and horror, he says, "Hey, my friend here likes the ladies." A homeless girl comes out of nowhere and proceeds to kiss me on the mouth. My friend picks me up and throws me over his shoulder. I proceed to flip the fuck out in my apartment, shrug it off, and we venture back out. Well, I got separated from my group in the crowd, and then I see the 3 drifters again. I try not to show that I'm shitting bricks when they ask me where they can find a liquor store. I point down the street to the Kroger, and they say, "Okay, you can show us." I'm a small woman, and they shove me into their vehicle. I think naively at the time that they will literally let me out at the grocery store, except it's closed because it's after midnight. I plead for them to let me out of the car, but they keep saying the power does what it wants, and headed away from the safety of the campus area onto the freeway and out of the state. For the next 4 hours, I visited 3 states with them while pleading for my life. I'll never forget how they kept saying the power does what it wants and talking about how they're going to have fun with me. I kind of resigned myself to the fact that I was going to die, that I would never graduate college or see my family again. They pulled into a gas station, and I slipped out of the vehicle to be grabbed again, but I screamed my head off for the clerk to help. That's when they started talking to me about the cliff. I mentioned that my family is full of police officers, and that they're probably already looking for me, how they're committing a federal crime, and that I won't press charges if they take me back to campus. I guess that's when the girl started to feel sorry for me, because she started to say, "Guys, she's really scared. Maybe we should just drop her off somewhere. This doesn't have to get any worse." They took me back to the campus area, and as soon as the girl pulled me out of the car, a police officer called my name. The girl shoved me toward the cop and yelled, "The power does what it wants, and tonight it let you live." I've never been so happy to sit in a cruiser. They pursued them, but I don't know if they were ever caught. My roommate dropped out of college and joined the military, and I transferred to another school. So, ladies and gentlemen, please be careful walking at night. Always keep your cell phone with you if possible, and call the police if you see suspicious people near your apartment. I had a brush with death that day, and I'm so grateful for the time I have now. This could have been written better, but it's still hard to talk about.